God is good.
All the time.
And all the time.
God is good.
I was working on the sermon this week, and I was trying to think of things that embarrassed me, that I was embarrassed of, that I could share and not get in trouble. No, things that I was embarrassed of. But I thought it really only makes sense at this time to talk about things that I'm embarrassed of that are out of my control. So I thought, what am I really embarrassed of? One of the things I'm really embarrassed of is I'm a poor speller. So I know why now. I didn't know that there was a connection, but I am dyslexic, and I didn't realize. And I've always made this excuse, I just can't learn to spell. And some people have thought I just kind of use that as an excuse, but I've been doing some research on dyslexia the past couple of years, and it found out that there is a connection between spelling and learning how to spell, and with math too. So I've got my excuses out on the table now. I thought, I'm a poor speller. I don't like to spell in front of people, and I always make mistakes when I tweet or when I'm on Facebook. And man, it's really awkward and it's really embarrassing. I thought today I could add some things to that list with the way that I run the PowerPoint when Wendy's out of town. Those are some things that embarrass me too. Think about the things that you're embarrassed of in your life, the things that are out of your control. I imagine that you could probably find some things that are probably as benign and unconsequential, like poor spelling or making mistakes with the PowerPoint. And you might have something that's pretty big that really is kind of shameful. I think it's a good idea this time of year to say, well, if those are the worst things I have, if that's all I'm really facing, I guess I don't really have it so bad. See, I'm thinking about the birth of Christ. I'm thinking about when Jesus comes. And Ben read for us two, I think, of the most pertinent passages that we look at from Matthew 1 and Luke chapter 2. And you've got to kind of put yourself in the shoes of Joseph and Mary, or sandals if you want to prefer. Maybe they didn't have shoes. Maybe they had sandals. You know, Matthew chapter 1, if you haven't already opened there, I want to ask you to go ahead and open to Matthew chapter 1. Because Matthew records what's taking place, and we get a little bit of perspective and insight into the mind of Joseph, particularly in verse 19. Her husband Joseph, now notice they're only engaged, but he's still called a husband. Engagements in those times were really serious. I mean, they were binding. You had to go into the presence of the elders of the community, and you signed a prenuptial agreement in some cases, and it was really binding. It was really legal. So Joseph, they're engaged. Being a just man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolves to divorce her quietly. Because why? Verse 18, Mary, she's found to be with child. Think of the shame. I know right now, I guess it's still on television. I've never watched it, but I've been at the gym when it's come on, and I've seen people talk about it on Facebook, and I've heard about it. There's a show on MTV called 16 and Pregnant, or something along those lines. I don't know if any young people are familiar with it. I've never watched it. I don't think there's much shame in our culture in that anymore, to have a child out of wedlock. In the days of Jesus, though, it's pretty bad. In fact, people back then were stoned. They were killed for that. But Joseph, he knows it's not his child. He doesn't know how it happens, and so he wants to quietly divorce her. He wants to put her with. He doesn't want to shame her. He doesn't want to embarrass her. He doesn't want to go through any more of the grief that she, in his mind, has already had. And so he says, you know what? I'm going to do this quietly. I'm not going to make a big scene. I'm not going to embarrass you in front of everybody. I'm not going to bring this before the city council and have you stoned or anything like that. And so as he's considering, you know how the story goes. The angel of the Lord appears to him in a dream and says, Joseph, son of David, do not fear to take Mary as your wife, for that which is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit, and she'll bear a son, and you'll call him Jesus. So here's Joseph. Think about what's going on in his life. I've set my heart on this girl. I want to spend the rest of my life with her, and now all of a sudden, obviously she's with child. He wants to put her away. So think about the embarrassment there. But put yourself in Mary's shoes for just a moment, or her sandals. When you think about it as a teenager, she's probably somewhere between 14 and 16, we guess. She's a teenager. Think of all the wild things that you get into trouble for and that you try to make up excuses for when you're a teenager. But imagine trying to explain to your parents, to the community, to the future husband, hey, I'm going to have a baby. But really, this is about something between me and God. Think about it. Who's going to believe your story? Think about that for a moment. The fear, the shame, the humiliation, it's starting to show. There's that baby, it's coming. You're not married yet. There hasn't been a celebration. There hasn't been the week-long honeymoon. None of that's happened yet. And so there's Mary, teenage girl. And again, in a day and age where people are stoned for having children out of wedlock. So here's how Jesus gets started. Under these circumstances, before he even begins life on earth, he's in a small town with a big-time scandal. You've got a pregnant girl, a teenage girl. Her fiancé is ready to put her away quietly. And I'll give you one more on top of that. We know how the birth story will happen. We're going to look at that in Luke chapter 2 in just a moment. But do you think the rumors stopped once he was born? Do you think the scandal really stops once he's born? His whole life growing up in Nazareth, there will be people later on down the line who will recognize he's the Son of God. They're going to understand he's God. But think about it, in a small town, the whole time he grows up, what are people going to remember about him? Oh, that's the family where the little boy was. She was pregnant before. You're kind of illegitimate, aren't you? There's something wrong with your family. Do you think that ever really went away? I don't think it ever really goes away. A couple of things in Matthew's gospel before we go on to Luke's. Look at verse 23 very carefully. Behold, now he's quoting back from Isaiah chapter 7. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call him Emmanuel. Which means what, according to the text? God is with us. So before Christ even comes, before he is born, it's predicted and it's being fulfilled here. And the idea is when he becomes flesh and when he dwells among us, the Christmas story is about God entering into our world and what? Not just being there, but it's beautiful from the passage. It's not just that he's there, he's what? He is with us. One more thing in Matthew's gospel that I really like. Look up at verse 21. She will bear you a son, and you shall call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. Do you know what the name Jesus really means? I know we're not all supposed to know all the original languages, and maybe we don't always keep it memorized, but I think it's pretty healthy for our spiritual well-being. Do you know what the name Jesus means? It means Jehovah saves. It's really from the Hebrew name Joshua, which means Jehovah saves. So the angel says, you're going to name him Jesus. In other words, you're going to name him God saves his people. So before he is even born, here he comes with this idea of God is going to be with us and God is going to save us. So you got Joseph, he's a conscientious guy. Doesn't want to upset the town, doesn't want to upset Mary, doesn't want to put her to shame. You've got Mary, who's got to be pretty courageous because she's pregnant and she's been told this story. Hey, the Holy Spirit is going to come over you. She's going to conceive the child of God, and she's got to go around and tell people that story. And she has to live that out. So there's conscientious Joseph, there's a courageous Mary, and in the midst of building this new life together, and in the midst of all the anxiety, they're going to bring a baby into the world. And this is God's plan. He's going to bring them together. He's going to bring this child into the world under these circumstances. Do you know what I would do if I were God for the day? If it were me, and I'm going to come into the world because Jesus is God, he's going to enter into the world, I would have come into a palace. I'm just going to tell you right now. I would have come, and it would have been comfortable. I would have had a lot of security. I would have had a lot of strength. I'm God after all, right? So you're going to know that I'm powerful. There's not going to be a question about it. I'm going to come and I'll have this nice, solid family together. And everything is going to be peaceful. I'm not going to end up in a manger, surrounded by smelly everything. Smelly shepherds, smelly people, smelly surroundings. And I'm not going to come in a day and age when the world is oppressed by evil dictators and evil emperors. I'm going to come into a democracy. And that's the way it's going to be, but that's not how Jesus chose it. It's counterintuitive. It doesn't make sense at first. I think by the time we get to the end of the story, it makes sense. But it doesn't make sense that you would come with these meager circumstances, under the cloud of shame, under the scandal that he comes into. It doesn't make sense. And you know why it doesn't make sense for us? Because you know where we trust our theology to? You know where we get our ideas about Christmas? Currier and Ives. And if it's not Currier and Ives, it's Hallmark. Have you ever seen a Hallmark greeting card before at Christmas time? What's it all look like? Everyone's clean. They're all happy. They're all smiling. And they're all from outer space or something because they've got something over their head. I don't know. Is that to connect them to the mothership, the halo? I'm not sure. But Bethlehem, when Jesus comes, it's not a Currier and Ives painting. It's not a Hallmark Christmas card. Everything seems to be different than what we're taught. Turn over to Luke chapter 2, please. And I want us to pick up the story. So just like Ben read for us, there's going to be a census. So think about this. In our day and age, Tammy worked for the census before. In our day and age, when there's a census that takes place, the census worker goes from door to door. Who lives here, how many live here, and you get all the questions that you ask. In that day and age, it wasn't so convenient. You go to the hometown where your family lineage is from, where your family comes from. So, do we have any European descendants here? Imagine if you had to go back. That might not be so bad. Well, but wait, you got to pay for that family trip, right? So you got to go back to your hometown and you're going to register. And so Joseph, in verse 4, Luke chapter 2, Joseph, he also goes up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth, to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David. So he's going there to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who is with child. You know what I found out? Joseph didn't have to take Mary with him. I always read the story thinking that everybody had to go. But in that day and age, everybody didn't have to go. The head of the house could go and register. That doesn't make sense. Now, back to the Hallmark gift card for a moment, Christmas card, back to Currier and Ives. When Mary is traveling to Bethlehem, what's the picture? How does she travel? By train? By boat? By plane? How does she travel? So I always thought that she had to go, and I always thought she had to ride on a donkey. And then I read the history. She didn't have to go. And then I went really radical, and I read the Bible, and I couldn't find the donkey. I know it's in there somewhere. So I kept reading it. So I read through it about 5 or 6 times. Sure enough, there was no donkey there. And then it got even stranger, because I always thought she rode a donkey, and then later on in chapter 2, when they present Jesus and they bring the sacrifice of the 2 turtle doves, I went back and I read in the law, and you know what they were really supposed to sacrifice? A lamb. For the firstborn child, you have to sacrifice a lamb. But the law makes an exception. If you're too poor to sacrifice a lamb, then you could offer 2 doves. If they couldn't afford a lamb, they sure couldn't afford to ride a donkey. And Mary didn't have to go. And then I went ahead and I looked up the distance. You know, Google has Google Earth. Do you know how far it is from Nazareth to Bethlehem? It's about 70 to 90 miles. So let's just average it out, 80 miles. You're pregnant, you're ready to have a child, you don't have the money for a lamb, so we know you don't own a donkey. So that means she walked. Joseph didn't have to bring her. Why did he bring her? I think he was afraid for her. I'll just tell you what I think. The Bible doesn't say. The Bible just says that they went together, and we know that it's a far journey. We know that she's with child, and we know she's about to have a child. But we also know from that culture, there are still some people that probably don't believe her story. As amazing as it is, the whole town didn't believe. Oh, your child's from God. Well, congratulations. I think Joseph brings her with because he's afraid that things could turn bad while he's gone. So shame, rejection, they're marginalized. And then we get to one of the most famous parts of the whole story of the birth of Christ. So they go to Bethlehem. They're going to be registered. And while they're there, verse 6 says, as if they were surprised it was going to happen, while they're there, what's going to happen? It's time for the child to give birth, for her to give birth to the child. And so she gives birth to her firstborn son and wraps him in swaddling cloths and lays him in a manger because why? There's no room at the inn. So again, I'm using my Hallmark greeting card theology. I'm thinking my Currier and Ives beautiful Christmas. So I'm thinking there's no room at the Holiday Inn, right? That's not what this is about. See, this isn't the word for a hotel in the Greek. I thought that's what it was. It's not the word for the hotel. It's not the word for the commercialized inn where people go and spend money to stay with strangers. It's really the word for the guest room. So when they get into town, I always kind of thought, well, why doesn't the family put them up? Now it kind of makes sense. There's some shame that's going on here. There's some rejection. There's some scandal that's going on here. And so when they get to where there are family, hey, we've got a family guest room and there's no room for a woman who's about to have a baby. You think you've got family problems. For me, this makes it even more personal. No room in the family guest room. So we got to remember, Jesus could have come any way he wanted. He could have come in a palace like I would have. He could have came in power and majesty and strength. He could have come in the world under any other circumstances. But he chooses Joseph. He chooses Mary. Chooses the backwater town of Nazareth, chooses to be born in Bethlehem, meager circumstances, vulnerable circumstances, born in obscurity. Where's Nazareth anyway, right? What's it famous for other than the song Love Hurts? We don't know anything about it. We don't know much about Nazareth, do we? And think about, nothing good comes from Nazareth. That's, from John's Gospel. Nothing good comes from Nazareth. And the weakness, too. I mean, if I were God, man, I'd have thunderbolts, lightning. I'd be coming in, and I would look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and you would know it, and I'd be all, I wouldn't come as this crying little, messy, weak little baby. There's got to be some bigger point to the whole thing. So why would God do that? Why would he choose the scandal? Why would he choose the humiliating circumstances? Here's what I've come up with, and I'm going to conclude with this. I guess I'm speaking from my personal opinion. I don't know that I would feel comfortable approaching a robed king with a gold scepter, sitting on a powerful throne. I don't know. I mean, I'm not often in the presence of powerful, influential world leaders, but I imagine, if I were to meet the president or maybe the Queen of England, I probably would be at a lack of words, or I would feel humbled, or I might feel out of place even. So I'm not going to feel comfortable approaching someone like that. But I think everybody, at least the people I've met, the people I know, I think everyone feels comfortable approaching someone from a humble carpenter's family.